So today's text comes to us out of the book of Exodus, chapter 32. We're going to have a little Bible lesson before we get there first, because we need to know what's happening in the book of Exodus. So for those of you who know, the book of Exodus is the second book of the Bible. It goes Genesis, and then it goes Exodus. Are you ready to move quick? Because Exodus is a lot of stuff, and we're going to move through it really quick. So are you with me? Good, perfect. Here we go. Exodus begins with the Israelites enslaved and oppressed by the Egyptians. Then baby Moses shows up, an Israelite, comes down the river and is picked up by a member of the Pharaoh's family. He grows up in Egypt with the Pharaoh's family. However, as a young man, he kills an Egyptian for mistreating an Israeli slave. He runs away. God finds him, comes to him in a burning bush, and tells Moses that he has to free them from slavery. After his burning bush experience, Moses goes to the Pharaoh and tells him, "Let my people go." The Pharaoh says no. Then the plagues occur in Egypt. Pastor Meredith last week taught us about the origins of the Passover. So the Passover happens, and the Pharaoh finally allows the Israelites to leave Egypt. They pack up and go. In chapter 13, the author tells us that God led the Israelites out of Egypt with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. However, just as soon as they left, the Pharaoh decides to send his armies after him. He changes his mind. In chapter 14, this is the big thing. Moses parts the Red Sea with the staff in the air. While the Israelites get to go through on dry land, the Egyptian army was not so lucky. They were swept back into the sea when the waters returned to normal levels. In the last verse of chapter 14, this is important. It says, "And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they put their trust in him and in Moses his servant." It's here where the Israelites finally realize and recognize the goodness of God. In chapter 15, they celebrate their victory over the Egyptians. In chapter 16, when they're hungry, God sends food. God sends manna from the heavens to feed them. In chapter 17, when they're thirsty, God says, "Moses, hit your staff against the rocks, and the rocks will give your people water." And then in chapter 20, when the people are looking for ways to experience God even more, the holy presence of God, God gives them commandments to bring them back into community with him. The nation of Israel is so thankful for God that when Moses was down from the mountain in chapter 24, they say, "We will do everything the Lord has commanded. We will obey." Then the focus of chapter 25 all the way to the end of the book of Exodus is the way the Israelites worshiped God. From chapters 25 through 31, we read about the arrangement and the layout of what is called the tabernacle, or this traveling worship tent that went with them and was the presence of God. And then we catch up to our text in chapter 32, and we read that the Israelites screw everything up. All of this amazing stuff is happening. God is showing how much he loves and cares for Israel. He gives them food when they're hungry, water when they're thirsty. He gives them a place to experience his holy presence. They're excited to go where God is going. And then we read they create a golden calf, an idol. They screw up what God is doing. They screw up the goodness of God, which reminds us a lot of what happens in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, where God is creating everything and it's good. God creates Adam and Eve and lets them live in this perfect existence in the garden, and everything is good. And then we turn the page to chapter 3, and we read that Adam and Eve decide to turn away from God's goodness to do their own thing. Then we go back in Exodus 32, God is creating again before this time. In chapters 25 through 31, he is excited to be with his people again. In the creation of the tabernacle, you can read the excitement in God. You can read the excitement behind God's creativity in these chapters. And then the Israelites think they know better, and they create a golden calf, once again choosing to do things other than God's way. Reading this text this week, standing from afar, I couldn't help but think, like Israel, God has given you everything that you want and so much more. Why are you screwing this up? I just want to yell at them, say, like, don't do this. The other night, my wife and I, Sarah and I, were watching a scarier movie. And you know what scary movies, when there's like a loud noise and the characters go, "You know what we should do? We should go into the dark and investigate what that was." Like, that's a terrible idea. Like, that's what I want to yell at the Israelites. Like, you know this isn't a good idea. It's easy for us to read the text to say, you know better than that. But as we're going to read in our text today, we're really similar to the Israelites. We're really similar in the way of our insecurities and our need for immediate action on the behalf of God. Let's take a look at the text this morning. Chapter 32, verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us, who shall show us the way. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what's become of him." So this is what's happening. Moses has been back and forth off the mountain for about 40 days, listening to God's commands, receiving all the details about the tabernacle and the law. And the people are growing impatient. They're growing impatient with Moses. They're growing impatient with God. See, they want to experience God. They want to experience more of his goodness. So they decide, we don't know what's really happening up there, but let's just see if we can't make things happen down here. They're looking for direction. They're looking for purpose. So they turn and they say to Aaron, "Make us some gods." Now, before we pass judgment on the Israelites, you have to understand that the nation of Israel has been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. And they have finally just broken out of this slavery. But this generation of Israelites has grown up with Egyptian culture, who have worshiped many gods and all kinds of idols. And even though they've experienced God's goodness, even though God's love and care for them is coming to them in many ways, even though they have left Egypt, Egypt hasn't left them. They have become comfortable with what they grew up with in Egypt. It was all they ever knew. So when they turn to Aaron and say, "Aaron, make us gods so we know the direction to go," that's all they've ever known. So Aaron, who is Moses' brother, the leader's brother, says, "Okay, that's a good idea, because we're waiting on God, but let's see if we can't push the issue a little bit here." Their impatience is something that we can relate to. How often do we get in trouble because of our impatience when we say to God, "Okay, God, we've been waiting here for a while and we think it's time for you to show up now. We really need an answer to this prayer, like today, if that's okay with you," or like we just really need you to show up right now. This is a struggle that all of us have, especially living in a quick and efficient culture. Don't get me wrong, I like quick. I like efficiency. I like getting my food fast. I like having fast internet. I like asking Siri, "Hey Siri, I'm lost, where do I go?" Like, I like quick and efficiency. But in our quick and efficient culture, God's time doesn't always sync up with ours. We have to be careful that we're not jumping ahead of God, who's delaying sometimes. And this is what's happening to the people of Israel. They want God to show up now. So they decide to push the issue. They say, "Aaron, make us some gods who are going to show us the direction to go next." And I'm just shaking my head, reading the text, saying, Didn't you read Exodus 20, guys? Like, the first commandment, do not have any other gods but me. Like, Israel, it's clear. God has made it clear. But they still ask Aaron, "Make us gods who shall go before us, for this Moses, the man who's brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what's become of him." And Aaron is kind of taking the brunt of all this, and he's looking at the mountain. He doesn't see Moses. He doesn't see God. He's getting pushed on all different kinds of ends, and he just goes, "All I have ever known is making gods out of idols." So he says this in verse 2. Aaron said to them, "Take off your gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he was really excited. He built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. See, Aaron has the best intentions here. He wants the people to experience God. He wants to experience God. He wants direction. He wants purpose, so he relies on what he knows. He forms an idol out of gold and calls it God. But as you know and I know after reading the text, all that really does is make God extremely angry. As we go to the next verse, new scene, God and Moses on the top of the mountain. The Lord said to Moses, this is 7, the Lord said to Moses, go down at once. Your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf and have worshipped and sacrificed it and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, how stiff-necked, how difficult they are. Now let me alone so that my wrath may burn hot against them and I may consume them, destroy them. And of you, Moses, he's talking to Moses, I will make a great nation. God isn't happy here. God isn't happy with his people. He said to his people, the number one commandment is do not have any other gods but me. He's so angry that he's willing to destroy them to start anew. He's so angry, he tells Moses, and parents and grandparents, you get this right here. He says, go down at once. Your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. How many times have you done this as a parent and you said, that is not my kid, that is your kid today? Like, that is what God is doing here. But thank God for level-headed Moses coming in and saying, hey, Lord, like, these are not my people. These are your people. Verse 11, but Moses implored the Lord his God and said, oh, Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath. Change your mind and do not bring disaster on your people. And then in verse 13, he turns and he says, remember the promises you made here, Lord. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven. And all this land I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. Moses, on the behalf of the people of Israel, these sinful people, he's pleading for them, for God not to give up on them. And somehow, some way, Moses changes God's mind, and in verse 14, the end of our reading, it says, and the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. God changes his mind despite us, despite his people. His passion and his love for his people in Israel had overcome his wrath, anger, and his judgment. Today, it's easy for us to take a huge step back and look at the mistakes that people made in the Bible and say, they should have known better. They clearly were doing something wrong. God was angry. I mean, didn't they read the tablets? God was pretty clear. Number one commandment, if you're going to break any of the commandments, you probably shouldn't do number one. Do not have any other gods but me. They shouldn't have created an idol. They shouldn't have made false gods. And it's easy to say, if they had everything they ever could have needed, ever wanted, why would they distrust God's goodness? But we can't take a step back, friends, and look at this text from afar, because we erect our own idols. We erect our own golden calves in our lives. Our idols are whatever we love most, we serve most, we seek out most, give to the most, worship the most, and care about the most. Our gods are our careers, our bank accounts, the way we look, particular positions or degrees, influence, power, physical pleasure. Our gods are everything that control us and pull us away from God. We all have these in our lives. We all say we'd rather worship our idols or our false gods rather than worship God. We'd rather rely on the goodness that we create rather than God's goodness. So we can't take a big step back and say, silly Israel, like, what are you doing? Clearly you made God angry. without taking a look at our own golden calves in our lives. Exodus 32 gives us a great opportunity to ask this question. Have I put anything in my life before God? Have I put anything in my life before God? Exodus 32 helps us become aware of the obstacles in the relationship with God that we've created by erecting our own golden calves. The experience of the Israelites in Exodus 32 challenges us daily to make an effort to break down the idols that continue to control our lives. Commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods but me. Idols are stubborn things, and they're not going to go away, and it's going to be a daily grind to try to throw them out. And I'm telling you, as a sinner, I know how that is. But if we make the effort to dismantle our idols, our false gods, God is easier able to come to us. It frees up ways for God to come to us so that we might be able to experience the fullness of life that God has promised us through Jesus Christ. Amen.